Well, let me give you an example of what how I'm trying to develop this. I was recently approached by, excuse me, I was recently approached by a Lewisham Borough Council. Lewisham, as you know, is about 40% of its population is of ethnic origin. It speaks 120 languages. It has one of the highest unemployment, deprivation and crime levels in the country. And the council has got to reduce its budget by 25%. So what's going to happen? They rang me up about that, and I said, okay, we will organize conversations between the inhabitants, 250,000 people there, and we will get to discover what the talents of the population are, and we will get the different communities, each of which do not speak to each other. The Vietnamese mix among themselves, and Poles mix among themselves, and different West Indians speak themselves, and there's very little mixing. So how can they learn what the others have to say? And then we can say, well, if there are these talents, how can we get them to invent new kinds of work, new kinds of interaction, which will enable them to do what government and the councils are no longer able to do. And this is an experiment which we're going to roll out in the autumn quite soon, and we're going to have big dinners at which we will, very simple meals, at which people will come, say a couple of hundred people at one go, and they will talk to people they don't know. And in order to make it, to attract those who will not be interested by it, I've invited some film stars to come, and so people who say would like to talk to celebrities will be attracted by the celebrity and therefore have to talk to somebody ordinary as well, and this is kind of bait to make these more popular. So that's one example of the things I've been doing, and I've been doing the same kind of thing in regard to our so-called consumer society. The consumer society is something which we're not going to abolish, because poor people obviously want to enjoy some of the comforts which richer people have, and this is always going to be the case. But there's no reason why it should be what it is. And so I was invited by IKEA to make a speech to their managers, and they got interested, and they gave me an IKEA store to do what I would like to do, which is to turn a store which is the epitome of a consumer society into a cultural center. So I've been introduced into IKEA, music and dancing and theatre and poetry and conversations, because we've got big restaurants and I've got people to talk to each other there. So when you come to IKEA, you go and you normally you just have to go and look at things you want to buy and you just buy them, and you clear out and you don't talk to anyone. And I persuaded the managers that this might be interesting, and so I've got one store in which I've been doing this, and that seems to me to be a way of dealing with a consumer society, by getting people to realize that there are other alternatives in the world and apart from shopping. And it's not easy. Because, for example, I brought in Indian dancers. Now, I think Indian dancing is absolutely brilliant. It's the most sophisticated kind of dancing. And I put them there, and people just pass by without looking. What's the matter with them? They couldn't see that this was fantastic. And the reason is, one is that they're so concentrated on the shopping, but the second reason is that it's unfamiliar. And most English people do not know anything about Indian dancing. And so you've got to make them familiar. And it takes time. And people are always frightened of what is unfamiliar. And So I think that is on the agenda of the 21st century. And the final thing that I'm trying to do is to say, okay, you're all doing jobs which are perhaps not the ideal jobs. And most people are doing jobs which are very similar to slave labor, part-time slave labor. You don't do it because you like to do it, you do it because you need some money. And you have to obey what you're told to do. And most jobs were invented, at a time when people were uneducated. And now that we're putting more and more people and giving them expensive education, there aren't the jobs which they would like to have. Jobs which make their lives more interesting, which enable them to travel, which enable them to use all their talents, to develop their talents, and so on. And even if you get a top job as a lawyer, some lawyers rang me up, and I asked them, how much of your brain do you use in your job? 15%? No, they said, less than 15%. How can that be? Because they are used as drudges by the top lawyers, and have young lawyers to do the donkey work. Well, that is unacceptable. So we've got to reinvent the way we work. The 18th century invented the Industrial Revolution. It changed the way people worked. It put them in factories. China is now copying this, but it is not the ideal system. And so we've got to go through every profession and see how we can make it suit ourselves, how we can reinvent the way we live. And that is what I'm trying to do in the Oxford News, and this is what you've been invited to do here, is to reinvent the way we travel. And so far we have concentrated on the technical aspects of travel. Are we using too much petrol and so on? But is it right to cram people into sardine box-like aeroplanes where they can't move for 5 hours? It's terrible. Why don't we revolt? Why don't we say we don't like it? Because, airlines are trying to make profits, which is very difficult for them because they spend so much on all sorts of things. So let us rethink it. And that is why I think it is so interesting living in our time, because the financial system has collapsed. We've propped it up again. It's going to collapse in another 5 years. All we've done is mended it, and we haven't rethought it. Is this the best system we can have? And so we need to do the thinking about this. We need places where we can think, and this is what we ought to be talking about. Not just, the World Cup or whatever it is, amusing though that might be. So there are many interesting things to talk about, and there are many interesting opportunities as a result of these conversations to do something with other people which you cannot do on your own. So that is why I'm interested in conversation, why I say conversation is just the beginning of a process which is much larger. When I go to IKEA and I talk to the shop assistants, and normally you don't have a big conversation with a shop assistant. You do in an Oriental bazaar, where you talk, and you give them tea and so on, and it's a social occasion. But in a modern shop, productivity and all that, you don't talk to them. But I talk to these shop assistants, and they're very interesting people. There's a person there who is working in the office equipment, selling desks and things. He's got a degree in horticulture. Wow! Then you talk to someone else. She used to be a dance teacher, and she's just selling sort of pillows cases and things like that. Well, why don't they teach their customers about these things? And I say that to them, and they say, yes, they will. They're willing to do it. They'd like to do it, and they will do it in their free time, even for nothing. Because people have passions, if you have a passion about gardening or something, you want to tell people about them. Why don't we use these opportunities? Why is so much knowledge hidden from other people? And then, finally, I've spent my life in a university, and it's not what it's made out to be. It's very, very posh, but what it does, it makes you into a specialist. And if you are a chemist, it teaches you about chemistry, but it teaches you nothing about life. And it doesn't teach a chemist to talk to somebody who's studying ancient Greek. And perhaps now we need a new kind of university. We need a university which enables you to understand how people in different branches of knowledge with different kinds of education think. How does a lawyer think? How does an accountant think? How does an artist think? How does a businessman think? And you need to learn about that, and then you'll be able to talk much better, because now at the moment each profession talks in its own jargon, so that you can't understand. In the same way as in the Middle Ages, the scholars used to talk in Latin so that poor people couldn't understand. And so we have got a whole agenda of activities. We need to invent a new kind of university. And if any of you are multi-millionaires, please raise your hands, because we need somebody to endow a new kind of university. University, which we have now, was established, invented 800 years ago. Surely we've got a better idea than what was thought 800 years ago. We can think of something better. And we do need universities as they exist. They're very useful. It's very important to have specialists. It's very important to have surgeons who know their business. But we need people who understand the wide issue, who can communicate with others, because that is the way that we can advance beyond our own narrow interests and fighting simply for what is beneficial to ourselves rather than to others. So, in this afternoon, what we're going to propose now, I believe, is that this bus is going to get moving, and we're going to invite you to talk to each other, and you can ask that question. You can talk about that first question I'll put to you, which is how your priorities have changed and how you would like them to change. And I hope each person here is sitting next to somebody they don't know. Any exceptions? No? Very well. Never met anyone. Well, supposing we move on, and before we do that, I invite you to ask me questions about what I've said.